Hi, folks. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about Chud the Builder. Chud is also known as Dalton Etherly. He is a streamer from Nashville whose content primarily consists of walking around the city and saying things specifically designed to rage bait and trigger people. One of the things includes going around saying the N-word primarily to black people. Now, there are countless videos of this sort of behavior that Chud does unfolding online, especially on X, along with many different reactions. Notably, he was engaging in these actions while carrying a gun on himself. In fact, here is one of the situations he captured on stream and how it ultimately played out.
Mr. Chud does have a gun in his pocket.
I don't provoke anybody.
Listen,
I only stand my ground and defend myself.
Those of y'all that don't think that he out here unprotected and he ain't finna fight you. Mr. Chud has a gun in his pocket. Listen to me.
And he knows how to draw it like an old cowboy. Wow. You know, draw, boy. Draw down.
He has a gun in his pocket. I'm being so serious. When you run up on this man and you're mad about the racist stuff he says to you, if you know,
control yourself like a human.
That wouldn't even be anything that moves you. I'm 54 years old. That don't move.
Yeah, it don't move.
Just control yourself. See, you guys are mature. This is we're trying to class up the black community.
Man has
it's stuff like that. You know, class up the black community.
Yeah.
Do you realize that you're exposing a small percentage of the black community?
I don't know.
If you really do your background and educate,
hold on, one at a time.
Educate yourself on a lot of black people. I don't know if you noticed. This used to be Black Wall Street down here in Clarksville, Franklin Street. I know you don't want to know that part.
But he said I'm trying to class up the black community.
Yeah,
you can't class yourself.
I don't know.
Because if when you go to them little hoods looking for people, and when you go to them hoods, Greenwood, Lincoln Homes, and all them little hoods you go through, if you notice, if you really go knock on them doors, your people ain't hanging out. They in the house. But it's more people of the whites in the projects than it is us. You just don't see them because they mind their own business. And that's
what I'm saying. Class up the community. We want them to mind their business, stay civil.
You got to realize the projects was never meant for us.
Yeah, well, we already know the ghettos was made for a different type of people. But hey, you know, we ain't allowed to talk about them either, especially not out here in front of the courthouse.
Again.
The Jews don't like to be talked about out in front of the courthouse.
Now, clearly, Chud's content is provocative, as we just saw in this clip. He was just walking around with a gun on him, very visibly displayed. And you have to assume the content itself was designed to invite confrontation or at the very least provoke reactions from people in public. Because as we all know, those are the kinds of clips that go viral online. Rage baiting itself becomes the product when you're engaged in this sort of content creation. And Chud's content is fundamentally built around escalation, outrage, and reaction because that's what the internet most highly rewards. Now, needless to say, what we just watched was actually one of the calmer interactions that Chud had in public. There are far more heated situations and arguments involving Chud, both with black and white people, surrounding his language and the way he carried himself in public. And again, I think it's needless triggering, needless division, and unnecessary inflammation being poured onto tensions that already exist in American society. Racial division is unfortunately a very real part of American society, and I think we are getting further and further away from being able to truly coalesce as a country. Now, with all that being said, you may be asking yourselves, why are we even bringing up Chud right now? We usually don't discuss influencers on this show or anything of that nature, but I find this to be an interesting case because it highlights a cultural and political nexus currently playing out in this country, and we're going to get to that in a moment. First, though, let's cover some of the details surrounding this case to establish the context before we get into the broader implications. Now, Chud was arrested this past Wednesday, as I mentioned, and it all stemmed from an incident that played out in the streets of Nashville. According to official reporting, Chud got into an argument with another man identified by Montgomery County officials as Joshua Fox outside the Montgomery County Courthouse in Clarksville this past Wednesday. According to the warrant, Chud turned his body into a bladed stance toward Fox and reached for a firearm in his jacket pocket, after which a physical altercation occurred. Chud then fired his weapon and Fox was struck multiple times, according to the document. Chud now faces additional charges, including employing a firearm during a dangerous felony, aggravated assault, and reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon, according to Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Now, Chud has since been arraigned, and the clip of his arraignment actually went viral. Here it is.
So we're gonna have a bail.
I'm gonna set just a bond right now after we have our bail hearing. Then I'll let you make
all the arguments. We can go through all the factors in the statute and see if that gets amended up or down, okay?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to set initial bond at $1.25 million. $1.25 million. Based upon the fact of how many people were in the courtyard, were here at the courthouse, and the seriousness of all these felonies and his bond status.
Now, Chud has since raised enough money to post bail. As you guys know, when someone is given bail, they usually only have to put up roughly 10% of the total amount through a bondsman. In Chud's case, his bond was set at around $1.2 million, meaning he would need to raise approximately $125,000 in order to get out. So far, he has reportedly raised around $212,000. And in this GiveSendGo, Chud tells part of his story. He begins by directly appealing to people who view themselves as defenders of free speech. He writes, "Dear friends, supporters, and champions of free speech, my name is Dalton Etherly, and I'm reaching out with a heavy heart, fighting to protect my family and my business." He goes on to explain that just over a year ago, he started DLE contracting in Clarksville, Tennessee. According to Chud, he was fired from a previous contracting job after BLM activists allegedly targeted him over words he shared online, jokes, and opinions that he claims were twisted in order to end his career. He says that with no other way to support his family and his 2-year-old son, he poured everything into building this small business, working tirelessly to provide for his family and create a future for them. However, he claims that dream is now under attack, not because of the quality of his work, but because of what he says online. Now, Chud admits in this post that he shared what he describes as mild jokes and unfiltered thoughts, and says that he sometimes used the N-word in what he considered edgy and harmless humor. He acknowledges that it is controversial, but frames it as an issue of free speech. From there, he claims that hundreds of people in his city began slandering his business and spreading lies in an effort to destroy everything he built. He also says the backlash escalated far beyond criticism, alleging that he received graphic death threats, including threats of rape and murder directed at both him and even his 2-year-old son. He writes, "As a father, hearing these threats against my little boy breaks my heart and keeps me up at night." Chud then says that in the middle of all of this, he unexpectedly went viral on Instagram, gaining more than 23,000 followers who connected with what he describes as his resilience and refusal to be silenced. He frames that audience growth as evidence that people are beginning to stand up for what he considers American ideals and free speech values. At the same time, he says the controversy destroyed his income and left him financially struggling. According to the GiveSendGo campaign, the money raised would go toward covering basic living expenses, protecting his family, exploring legal options against alleged slander and threats, and finding sustainable ways to support his family moving forward. Now, toward the end of the fundraiser, Chud broadens the situation beyond himself and frames it as part of a larger cultural battle over speech and cancel culture. He argues that this is not just about money, but about standing up against what he sees as mob tactics designed to destroy people over words and beliefs. And he closes out with another appeal to his audience, saying that if people ever felt silenced, attacked, or punished for their beliefs, then they understand the fight he believes he is facing. He describes his business as something born out of necessity after being canceled once before, and says that with support, he believes he can rise above the backlash, provide for his family, and prove that cancel culture will not break him. Now, with all that being said, there are obviously a lot of discussions happening online surrounding Chud, discussions about the legality of what he was doing, the consequences of his actions, the broader debates surrounding the facts of the case itself. There are also multiple competing narratives developing online regarding what exactly happened during the altercation, who escalated the situation, and whether this was a case of self-defense or something else entirely. As tends to happen with highly viral incidents like this, people are rapidly forming conclusions before all of the evidence has fully come out. And different sides online are already attempting to frame the narrative in completely different ways. One person who weighed in on this was Amari King, who shared an update regarding the situation and claimed additional facts will soon become clearer. According to Amari, the entire exchange was live streamed on Pump Fun, but the stream automatically shut down at the moment of the first gunshot due to an AI moderation or automated response system built into the platform. Amari also claims that the live stream footage is now being subpoenaed. Amari then laid out what he says are the facts of the incident based on the accounts of over 100 people allegedly watching the stream unfold in real time. According to Amari, Chud initially told Fox, "I hope your day gets better, God bless," and had already walked away from the situation. Amari claims Chud was approximately 70 to 100 yards away from Fox when he allegedly went out of his way to run up on Chud while Chud's back was turned to Fox. According to Amari, Fox then confronted Chud and punched him in the face. Amari argues that Chud did not initiate the physical confrontation and later added, "Some of you are about to look absolutely stupid." Now, with all that being said, there is cell phone footage of the interaction itself. However, the footage is not especially clear because a confrontation takes place underneath the shade of a tree, making visibility extremely poor. As a result, much of what you can actually make out in the video are silhouettes, shadows, and quick movements between the two individuals as they appear to lunge or move toward one another. So while the footage does exist, it is not some crystal clear video that definitely resolves every question people have about this altercation. But nonetheless, there is video, and here it is. Now, with all that being said, why exactly is this situation with Chud so significant? Why is this story attracting so much attention online beyond the obvious fact that it involved live streaming, internet virality, and a shooting? Why are so many people emotionally invested in this specific case? Well, because for a lot of people watching this unfold, this situation feels symbolic of a much larger cultural, political, and even legal conversation that has been building in America over the last several years. People are not just reacting to Chud himself, by the way. They are reacting to what they believe this case represents. They are looking at the public reaction, the legal treatment, and the media framing and the broader racial dynamics surrounding this case. And many people feel like they have seen variations of this exact situation play out repeatedly in recent years. Now, Chud himself has framed this almost entirely as a free speech issue. His argument fundamentally revolves around what somebody is legally allowed to say in public and how people react when confronted with inflammatory language, as we saw in that initial clip of Chud and those two black folks. One of the things he repeatedly talks about is restraint, specifically whether people are capable of exercising restraint when confronted with language they find deeply offensive. And the reality is that this is not some new social phenomenon. For many years now, we have seen stories involving serious confrontations, assaults, or public meltdowns stemming from racial slurs or racially inflammatory language, particularly involving the N-word. That word obviously carries deep historical baggage and emotional weight, particularly for Black Americans, though it also provokes reactions from many white progressives and activists as well. But ultimately, what people are examining here is the intersection between speech, emotional reaction, violence, and legality. More specifically, people are examining the reactions that occur when a white person publicly says the N-word and whether violence in response to speech is becoming socially tolerated or even morally justified in some circles. And to be completely honest with you, if you look at many of the comment sections surrounding this case, especially from accounts with large activist, progressive, or heavily Black audiences, there are absolutely people openly implying or outright arguing that violence in response to this kind of speech is justified. That is part of why this story has exploded the way it has. The conversation is no longer just about Chud. It has become about broader questions surrounding free speech, self-defense, racial tensions in America, and whether this country is applying justice equally across racial lines. And this is where people begin drawing comparisons to several other high-profile cases from the last couple of years. One example is the case of Shiloh Hendricks. About a year ago, Hendricks went viral after being filmed calling an 8-year-old Black child the N-word at a playground after an alleged dispute involving belongings taken from her child's diaper bag. The clip spread everywhere online like wildfire, and following the backlash, Shiloh was doxxed, her social security number was leaked online, and she allegedly received death threats, severe enough that she relocated her family for safety reasons. In response to this backlash, a GiveSendGo fundraiser was launched on her behalf that ultimately raised approximately $700,000. Now, whether people agreed with Shiloh's actions or not, what became notable was the public reaction to the public backlash to Shiloh's reaction on the playground that day for saying a word, albeit an offensive word, but nonetheless, a word. A lot of people viewed the fundraising support not necessarily as an endorsement of what Shiloh said, but as a backlash against what they perceived as mob-style punishment and social destruction for saying an offensive word. Something that the majority of Americans who paid attention to that case found to be an overreaction. But the reason the Shiloh Hendricks case became even more politically charged is because it followed another highly emotional case that many people online were already reacting to: the killing of Austin Metcalf. Austin Metcalf was a 17-year-old high school student in Frisco, Texas, who was fatally stabbed by another student, Karmelo Anthony, during a track meet altercation. According to reports, the confrontation escalated after Anthony was asked to move from the school tent area that Austin and his teammates were set up at. During the exchange, Anthony allegedly warned Austin not to touch him while reaching into his backpack. Austin then pushed Anthony, after which Anthony allegedly pulled out a knife and stabbed Austin in the chest. Austin later died in his twin brother's arms. Now, this case became nationally controversial, not just because of the killing itself, but because of the legal aftermath and the public response surrounding it. Karmelo Anthony was charged with murder and initially held on a $1 million bond. However, Judge Angela Tucker later reduced his bond to $250,000, citing factors such as his clean criminal history and academic and athletic record. He was then released on bond that same day. Anthony also raised an extraordinary amount of money online for his legal defense, reportedly over $500,000 on GiveSendGo alone, with fundraising totals eventually climbing even higher. At the same time, rumors also circulated online claiming that some of the money was allegedly being used by his family for luxury purchases, such as vehicles and housing. And this is where the broader cultural tension really begins to emerge. Many Americans, particularly many white Americans, increasingly believe there's a dual justice system developing in the United States. Whether that perception is fully accurate or not, it is undeniably a growing belief held by millions of people in this country. The perception is that race now heavily influences public sympathy, prosecutorial treatment, media narratives, bail decisions, and social outcomes. So when people compare these cases side by side, they're not necessarily saying the facts are identical. In fact, they clearly are not. Karmelo Anthony allegedly killed somebody with a knife. Chud's case, according to what we saw today, may ultimately turn out to involve self-defense after a physical confrontation where nobody died. But despite those differences, people are comparing the bond amounts, the public narratives, the fundraising responses, and the broader social reactions surrounding both cases. And this is why the GiveSendGo fundraising itself becomes politically symbolic. The Shiloh Hendricks fundraiser became, in many ways, a response against what people saw as an injustice in the Karmelo Anthony case. And now many people view Chud's fundraiser as part of that same ongoing reaction, a reaction against what they perceive as unequal standards, selective outrage, and inconsistent applications of justice depending on race, on politics, or just the mainstream social narratives. Now, whether one agrees with that interpretation or not, that is clearly the framework through which many people online are viewing these stories. Now, personally, I want to be very clear here. I do not think Chud's content is productive. I do not think deliberately provoking racial confrontation in public helps heal America's divisions. I think the internet increasingly rewards the worst forms of human behavior, that being outrage, humiliation, escalation, tribalism, and public spectacle. The reality is that rage bait has become an economy online. Provocative behavior generates clicks. Clicks generate money, and social media algorithms reward emotional intensity over social cohesion. That is simply the environment we currently live in. That said, I'm a strong believer in free speech. I believe that people have the legal right to say offensive things if they wish to say offensive things, even deeply offensive things. The First Amendment exists specifically to protect speech that people dislike. The primary legal limitation on speech in America is incitement, speech directly intended to provoke imminent unlawful action or panic. Personally, I do not think merely saying a racial slur automatically rises to the level of legal incitement. If saying a word alone becomes sufficient justification for violence in the eyes of society, then we are dealing with a much deeper cultural problem involving emotional self-control, social stability, and how we process offense in public life. Now, to be clear, we do have to acknowledge that there is a historical weight behind the word that Chud chooses to use, the N-word, and it explains why many people are deeply hurt by hearing it. But at the same time, free speech protections do not disappear simply because speech is offensive. The real question becomes whether we still believe in equal application of the law, regardless of race, politics, or public pressure, regardless of how offensive something being said is. And unfortunately, I do think many Americans increasingly feel that equal justice under the law is eroding. Ironically, concerns about systemic unfairness were once primarily framed as a left-wing critique of the justice system, but now you are increasingly seeing many white Americans expressing similar frustrations from the opposite direction. There is a growing perception among many sides of society that the justice system, our media institutions, and even public morality are no longer being applied impartially, but instead filtered through racial and ideological political frameworks. Now, obviously, every single case needs to be evaluated individually based on its facts, but what we are witnessing culturally is a broader collapse in trust. Trust in institutions, trust in fairness, trust in media narratives, trust in equal treatment, and even trust between racial groups themselves. America has become deeply tribalized. Increasingly, people view every incident through racial, political, ideological camps rather than through shared civic principles. And I genuinely believe that part of this broader collapse is spiritual, it's cultural, and it mostly comes from Marxist grievance being injected into our academic life. We are living in a society that increasingly rewards vengeance over forgiveness, outrage over restraint, humiliation over reconciliation, and tribal loyalty over any sort of truth. These fractures are constantly being inflamed by political incentives, by media narratives. They're being exploited by these Marxist optics, analyses, and internet incentives because division is profitable and emotionally addictive. And ultimately, that is why stories like this resonate so deeply online. They are no longer just isolated incidents. People increasingly see these stories like Chud's as symbols of a larger national fracture that nobody truly knows how to repair. This is what happens, folks, to a society that is continuously moving further from God, unfortunately. And I genuinely believe that's one of the primary reasons we're seeing an increase in violence, an increase in division, and social instability. These fractures are constantly being exploited by the political class in order to keep people divided into voting blocks, locked into racial, ideological, and cultural camps, each side convinced that the other represents an existential threat to their place in society or their vision of the future. And when you really step back and look at the broader historical context of how all of this is unfolding, it is honestly a very sad and deeply divisive moment in American history. And we can only pray that we come together and bridge these gaps so that we can once again go back to being a high trust society. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.